Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Tomorrow night, we mourn the holiday of Tisha B'Av. And there's a few reasons why we mourn on this day. First, we mourn the destruction of the first temple that was caused by the Babylonians in year 586 BCE. We also mourn the destruction of the second temple by the Romans in 70 CE. But moreover, our rabbis also want us to mourn. There was a rebel named Bar Kokhba who was a true hero of the Jewish people who again revolted against Rome, starting in 132, was successful but eventually was defeated by 135 CE. And so we mourn that, and we mourn the falling of Beitar. Also, we're still mourning. Titus caused more destruction in Jerusalem, and finally, we also mourn and we expelled from England and Spain in addition to other calamities against the Jewish people. This is a deep mourning for the Jewish people. Technically, it started 3 weeks ago. Just like Yom Kippur, there is a 24-hour fast. We refrain from washing, wearing leather, and soaps and perfumes. We read from Megillat Eicha, which is Lamentations, and just like we were to go to a traditional Shiva home when someone is in mourning, we sit on low stools or on the ground reading from this literature. And so for the most part, early Reform Judaism in the 19th century did not like this holiday because they felt we did not have to mourn for the destruction of the temple because we didn't like sacrifices. But in today's Reform Judaism, and I want to be cautious here, I think they've lost their way in order for us to observe this holiday with secular ideas that really don't relate to the spirit of mourning. So the question is, why was the temple destroyed, especially in 70 CE? There's this historical answer that I'll briefly talk about, but then it's the rabbinic answer that will really challenge us. So during the first century, 2,000 years ago in Judea, the Romans engaged in a census that really irritated Jews in that area. The priesthood was horribly corrupt. Also in Caesarea on the Mediterranean Sea, they were mixing populations, so Gentile versus Jews, and there was conflict there. And finally, something that we can relate to, they did a massive blue-collaring layoff at the temple, which caused a lot of people to get angry, which caused this revolt. That's what a good college professor will teach you or in rabbinical school. But if we were to look in the Talmud gives us a more introspective and reflective answer as to why the second temple was destroyed. They call it sinat chinam. Again in Hebrew, sinat chinam, which translates to baseless hatred Jews had for one another. Okay, so the rabbis in the Talmud say that the reason why the temple was destroyed in 70 CE had nothing to do with corruption of the temple. It was because the way how Jews treated other Jews. And remember, for a theological mindset of a rabbi 19 to 1800 years ago, they're going to believe that God would never allow the destruction of the temple because God is the all-powerful. But the reason why they make any sense of this is because their sins, the way they spoke and engaged to one another, caused the destruction of the Holy Temple. In Hebrew, we call this a tochacha, a rebuke. Our rabbis during the Talmud, and even today, they want to remind us that the way Jews treat other Jews is really important. Regardless of movement, Reform, Orthodox, Conservative, Reconstruction, that we engage in sinat chinam, this will only lead to more calamities against the Jewish people. So the question now that I want to ask, what does this mean for us today? And is there any possibility that we can learn from this destruction 2,000 years ago? So for us to answer this question, I want to pivot once again from sinat chinam, again, baseless hatred toward Jews against Jews, into something else which I think is just as destructive. Two things. I think we have apathy towards other Jews. I think we've engaged in not caring. I'm going to make my case. And second, I think we're living in Jewish tribalism where our secular passions of politics have replaced Torah and mitzvot. And we'll get to that in a bit too. So about the apathy. So last week, I mistakenly spoke about the rally in D.C. It was poorly planned, and that's on another issue. But with a 500% rise in Jew hatred of the month of May and June, I was hopeful that the 6 days of planning, they could get a turnout, especially from the East Coast. 3,000 people showed up. For those who are wondering, in 1987, when Jews were protesting the freedom for Soviet Jewry, 250,000 Jews marched in D.C. 2002, during the second Intifada in Israel, 100,000 Jews showed up at that protest. But this march last week, it was sponsored by every single major Jewish organization, from the URJ to the CCR to the AJC, the ADL. Stand with us. They wanted to see this get done, but it didn't happen. And just for the record, J Street chose to be absent from this rally, something for us to think about too as well. But again, with this apathy. A month ago, we had a town hall rally against anti-Semitism, and Temple Emanu-El was the host, and this was brought by Federation. I think we had over 100 people in the sanctuary, and truthfully expected the sanctuary to be packed. This was well planned and enough notice. And a deep soul searching would also say about this rally, I didn't see any of our young families standing in solidarity and trying to get all of the take-home messages for us to strengthen the Jewish people. This was truly painful again, so it's apathy. And finally, regarding what can we learn from our current destruction, this idea of tribalism, where political ideology, where we get our news from, I think this has replaced Torah for so many of us, that we don't want to show up for Jewish rallies because we feel that we'd be alienating our other allies, even though they may not like Israel, but the greater cause that we think about, whatever that may be, we don't want to hinder that relationship. I think those are the two main issues. And as I spoke about last week, it's not my passion to talk about the calamities of the Jewish people, but when I feel that we have an obligation, I'm going to. So then the next question I want to ask is, what do we do with this apathy? I can't cure the tribalism of the political theater. That's for another day and in a class, but not on the Bima. What do we do about the apathy? Is there any lesson that we can learn from Tish B'Av? So I want to tell two stories. One is personal, that happened 21 years ago, and one that happened this past Monday. 21 years ago, believe it or not, I was 18 years old and I was a senior in high school. I was already committed to play college tennis. At that time, my old high school tennis coach retired, whom I cherished, and we engaged a new coach. During my senior year, I started to notice that my coach started making truly inappropriate comments, which led to racial comments against African Americans, against the gay community, and then eventually towards the Jewish community. I wrote down every single thing that he had to say, and I want you to know something about West Bloomfield, Michigan. My high school tennis team, I think, had 15 members on it, 11 of whom were Jewish. Half the school board was Jewish. So it's the opposite ethos of Mountain Brook. So finally, I had enough of this. All the Jewish parents were talking, and the Jewish tennis players, that they could no longer deal with the said coach. I remember this moment like it was yesterday. I walked on the tennis court, and I resigned from the tennis team. I cleared it with my college coach, and she was proud of the stand that I was making. But I thought the team would resign out of protest because of the coach. And guess how many players resigned? Me. A few weeks later, I remember I was giving blood, and the principal got involved. Remember, my parents were deeply involved, and the coach admitted to every single allegation. Actually, it was like 41, and eventually was dismissed, but I'm going to get to that in a bit. I was deeply concerned with the way the administration handled this. So my last recourse was to speak at the school board meeting. Again, this felt like yesterday, where I would address the school board, again, half of whom are Jewish, and tell them the way that I feel. I can tell you who supported me at that meeting. My parents and a dear friend of me of blessed memory showed up who wasn't even Jewish, Steve Swissack of blessed memory. Nobody from the tennis team, nobody from the community, nobody from the Jewish community, and I stood there all alone. The coach was no longer renewed. In Michigan's high school sports, coaches have a yearly contract, so it's really easy to get rid of someone by not renewing their contract. So that was it. He was no longer coaching. I got over it, and I'm proud of the decision that I made today. But why am I talking about this instance? We all know what happened Monday afternoon, right? This is when we addressed the Mountain Brook School Board regarding what's going on regarding diversity training, curricula, for all of our students to become really good citizens. It was a tough venue to speak. For those who went, or for those who watched it on television, each speaker was given 3 minutes, and when they spoke, the school board attorney had an iPad with a countdown to make sure when their 3 minutes were up. So imagine speaking, and you have this massive iPad with a countdown. Now, I don't think I could ever give a Devar Torah if I had a countdown. I'm sure you'd love it for the high holidays, but nevertheless, I watched so many incredible speakers, and they put themselves in such a difficult position to try to convey an argument, and I got some phone calls. They said, Adam, it was so difficult to speak. I was afraid of the opposition, who later turned out not to be the issue. What was the issue? They did not get support from the Jewish community. Very few people called them and said, I'm so proud of you for what you did. Nothing. Almost a silence that I experienced 21 years ago. And my response to these people, the few, and I hate speaking in cliches because it's so cheesy, but I said, keep your foot on the gas. Don't give an inch. And when you evaluate yourself 20 years from now, you'll know that you made the stand. And I know there's Facebook posts that talk about this, but frankly, Facebook posts don't get anything done. It's so easy to make a stand on Facebook, and I'm being sarcastic. This person wanted to quit. Why continue to do it if I'm not going to get support? And I told her, you have to speak up. Because not only are you doing it for yourself, you're doing it for your children, what matter the most. But this is the apathy internally that I'm worried about. And I'm going to give you some numbers. There's recent polling that 33% of Jews under the age of 40, again, 33% of Jews under the age of 40 agreed that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinian people. That's an alarming number. Though a small number, but it's significant, under the age of 40, agreed with the following statement that Israel doesn't have the right to exist. I blame ourselves. I think we have failed to teach about Israel in a meaningful way throughout the years of the congregation, not ours, but in general. But the reason why we're getting these numbers is because of the vile hostilities that is happening in the universities, and you know how we feel about this. But these numbers will continue to get worse if we continue to be apathetic. I cannot stress that enough. For those who call me, Rabbi, then what do we do? So the first thing that we need to do regarding the Mountain Brook school system is show support for those who are getting involved. Don't make anyone feel alone. And again, posting in solidarity on Facebook is too easy and frankly doesn't do anything. Congratulate people, be there for them, be a voice, engage in empathic listening. Also, I want all of us to still have hope. Despite these horrible numbers regarding those Jews under the age of 40, the American Jewish Committee reporting this, that affinity between American Jews and Israeli Jews is incredibly strong. 60% of American Jews think being connected to Israel is important to their Jewish identity, and 75% of Israeli Jews see that those Jews who live outside the land of Israel is vital to the future strength of Eretz Israel. When we welcome Yom Kippur and we reflect and engage in this introspection, my job is to tell you is make Judaism a priority. Have that courage. Our rabbis also teach us that the reason why we have to mourn tomorrow night goes back to the story of the 12 spies. And remember, Moses sent out 12 spies from the tribe to see if they can reconquer Eretz Israel. 10 came back saying we couldn't do it, but Joshua and Caleb said, we will march on and we will win. Beat apathy by being Caleb and Joshua. Continue to celebrate the good. Last Saturday night, we had over 150 young Jews out for You Belong in Birmingham and Next Gen. And I told Danny Cohn that seeing this was hopeful. The Jews together from ages 40 to 20, which was interesting in itself, but they were out and celebrating being Jewish together. Come on the hike tomorrow. Tomorrow we read from Parshat Devarim, and this is the first parashah of the last book of the Torah, the book of Deuteronomy. And Moses begins this parashah by the repetition of the Torah, reminding us all that the Torah is good for. So, what a perfect parashah to get us on the path. We should mourn tomorrow. We should mourn the calamities of the Jewish people, but all the more so we should mourn the apathy that continues to plague us internally. But when Tisha B'Av comes to an end on Sunday night, be hopeful, be courageous, love Judaism. Shabbat Shalom.